You wake to a pounding on the door, not a polite knock, but the thunder of boots on the wooden threshold, rattling the shutters and echoing in your ears. It's still dark outside, but you already know. The Ottomans have come. Your father stands silently. Your mother clutches you so tightly it feels like she's trying to press you back into her womb. But it won't save you. A minute later, a soldier in a turban and iron gauntlets grabs your shoulder. You are 8 years old. You don't understand the Turkish words, but you understand your mother's gaze. There is no hope in it, only goodbye. You are led out into the courtyard, where other boys stand. Some are crying, their cheeks wet with tears and dew. Some are silent, their fists clenched until their knuckles are white. All are from Christian villages in the Balkans, chosen by a harsh calculation. 1 boy for every 40 households. You are placed on a horse. Your home disappears around a bend. You will never see your parents again. And a few years later, you yourself will say that this was the greatest gift of your life. For only then could you become a Janissary, an elite warrior whose loyalty to the Sultan was considered boundless, until it proved conditional. These boys became the most devoted force of the Ottoman Empire. They were taught to pray in Arabic, wear a turban, and die for the Sultan. They were called Janissaries, an elite created from the sons of strangers. But here's the paradox. These very slaves, torn from their families and converted to a foreign faith, eventually began to overthrow the very sultans they had sworn allegiance to. History loves to repeat that the Janissaries were unconditionally loyal. This is a myth. In reality, their loyalty was conditional, and when the conditions changed, they didn't just rebel, they killed. In 1622, they strangled Sultan Osman II with their own hands, not in the heat of battle, but in the silence of a prison cell. Not as enemies, but as arbiters of order who decided that the throne was no longer worthy of their protection. Who were they really, protectors of the throne or its executioners? The answer lies in the system that turned a victim into a weapon, and a weapon into a judge. By the end of this story, you will understand how a system created for absolute control spawned the most dangerous conspirators in the history of the Ottoman Empire. You will learn how the kidnapping of a child became an instrument of state policy, a cold, calculating machine known as Devshirme. How the breaking of a soul gave birth not to a servant, but to a warrior with a voice, and then with the right to decide who was worthy of being sultan. This is not just a story about soldiers. This is a story about how power creates a weapon and forgets that it can turn on itself. And when this weapon overturned the common cauldron, a symbol of brotherhood and loyalty, it meant not a rebellion, but a verdict. He doesn't remember his name at home, perhaps Ioan or Stoiko. Now he has a different name, given in Constantinople, in the barracks where crying is forbidden under penalty of 3 stick blows for every tear. He is 10 years old. He was taken from a mountain village where there isn't even a mosque, where the church stands on a hill like the last bastion of the past. His mother fell to her knees when the soldiers pointed at him. His father stood silently. Resistance meant death for the whole family. The boy was put on a cart with others. No one spoke. Only dust, the creak of wheels, and the smell of fear, sour, like sweat under a shirt. Along the way, one boy tried to escape. They found him by morning. No one else tried. In Constantinople, they were separated. The thin ones, to scribes and viziers. The strong ones, to soldiers. He was taken to the Janissary barracks. There he first heard his new name and understood the old boy was gone. He was erased, like a word from a wax tablet. Imagine, the state comes to your home and takes your son, not because you are guilty, but because he fits the criteria. Devshirme was not a recruitment drive. It was a machine for smelting people. 1 boy for every 40 households. Only healthy ones. Only intelligent ones. Only between 8 and 14. The sultans didn't trust the Muslim nobility. They had their own clans, their own interests, their own claims to the throne. But a Christian boy from the Albanian mountains? Nothing. No family, no name, no past. Only what the empire would give him. And this made him the ideal weapon. Would you give up your child for his own future? The Ottomans believed you would, and did it for you. Here's the blood-chilling irony. A boy torn from a Christian family had a greater chance of becoming a grand vizier than the son of the most influential pasha. Why? Because his loyalty was absolute, or so it seemed. The chronicles of Khatib Chalabi clearly record by the 17th century almost half of the empire's highest officials came from Devshirme. The system, created for suppression, gave birth to a new elite, an elite without roots, without conscience, but with power. And this power would soon demand not gratitude but obedience, even from the Sultan. Look here, this isn't cruelty. This is calculation. Every tear, every stick blow, every new name, everything works towards one goal: to destroy the individual and in their place cultivate an idea. An idea that doesn't question, it executes. But what happens when the idea starts to think? When the weapon decides it's the master? You know that feeling when your tool suddenly starts controlling you? The Ottomans learned this too late. And for now, in the barracks, the cauldron was boiling. And what was cooking in it were not soldiers, but judges. He spent his first night in the barracks shivering under a thin blanket. The floor was stone, icy even in July. The windows had no glass. The wind whistled like the cry of a forgotten child. The food, lentil soup, once a day, without salt, without oil. Speaking his native language was punishable. 3 stick blows for every word. Crying was even worse. For that, they beat you until you lost consciousness, until the tears dried forever. The instructors didn't yell, they just watched, and waited for a mistake. After a month, he no longer remembered his mother's face, only the smell of her scarf, which disappeared with the house. After 2, he began to dream of soup as if it were a feast. After 3, he began to fear not punishment, but loneliness, because in this barracks, the only way to survive was to become part of the pack, and the pack did not forgive. Weakness, especially the weakness of memory. Imagine your child returns home after a year. He speaks a different language, prays to a different god, calls you strangers. Devshirme didn't just take the body, it erased the soul, and in its place, it built a new one, according to a blueprint. Ottoman regulations clearly stipulated 2 years in the village to strengthen hands with hard work. Then, the barracks, musket, yataghan, marches to exhaustion, but most importantly, isolation. No letters, no names, no past. The Sultan became the father, the barracks, home, and the brother in arms, the only family. Would you survive in such a system, or would you break by the end of the first week? But the most chilling detail was the letters. Yes, letters. Instructors forced the boys to write home. In them, they thanked their parents for the gift to the Sultan, praised the new faith, praised the new life. Imagine you read a letter from a son who was forcibly taken away, and in it, joy, submission, gratitude. This wasn't a lie under torture. This was a lie from within, when the brain reconfigures itself so that enslavement seems like salvation. Archival copies of such letters still lie in Ottoman defters, and there is no pain in them, only the silence of learned obedience, as if the soul surrendered before the body. Do you know that feeling when you yourself justify what broke you? When pain becomes the norm, and the norm, a betrayal of yourself. The Janissaries didn't just survive, they became the elite. But the price was simple: forget who you were, and believe that you are what they made you. Look here, this isn't cruelty, this isn't a algorithm, cold, precise, without emotion. And it worked. Until the weapon started to think. He is handed a white cloth. He ties it around his head, his first turban. Before him is a Sufi sheikh from the Bektashi order, with a beard smelling of incense and campfire smoke. In his hands, the Quran. He recites an oath in a language that was recently foreign, but now sounds like his own. His old name is erased. Now he is Hassan of the Janissary Corps. At this moment he feels a strange relief. The pain recedes. The fear, too. Because now he is not alone. He is part of something larger. A brotherhood where everyone is ready to die for another. Where the common cauldron is a sacred vessel from which all eat with one spoon. Where prayer is not an obligation, but a connection, like a thread between souls. This is not just an initiation. This is a second birth. And in this birth, there is no place for the past, only a future forged in the fire of loyalty. Imagine, you join a sect where everyone knows your pain, but no one asks about your past, where your life is common property. The Janissaries didn't serve the Sultan. They served each other, and only through this brotherhood, the throne. Their faith was not in Allah, but in the cauldron, not in the Quran, but in the oath, not in Islam, but in the code: never betray, never surrender, never forget. Prohibition of marriage, prohibition of family, prohibition of private life until 40 years old. All this is not cruelty, it's glue. Would you survive without a private life if you knew everyone next to you is your shield and your sword? But behind the facade of Islamic strictness lay something quiet, almost holy. In the corner of the barracks, under a mat, an icon of St. George. In prayer, in a whisper, the name Demetrius. The Bektashi order allowed this. Their Islam was soft, mystical, almost Christian. They drank wine at rituals, sang songs in Balkan languages, and no one asked, "Are you Muslim or Christian?" They asked, "Are you with us?" Do you know that feeling, Widdy, when you betray everything, but inside there remains a small spark that no one sees? The Janissaries didn't forget. They just learned to hide memory deeper than fear. Look here. This isn't an army. This is a church with muskets, where the turban is a shroud for the old self and the cauldron is a communion cup, where loyalty is not to the Sultan, but to the brother on the right and left. And when the Sultan broke the covenant, unwritten but sacred, rebellion became a prayer. An overturned cauldron was not a signal of mutiny, it was a verdict, issued not by conspirators, but by priests. 1453. The walls of Constantinople crumble under the roar of cannons. In smoke and blood, the Janissaries, the first ones, without armor, with yataghans and prayers on their lips. Among them, he, the former Ioan, now Hassan, 20 years old, hands scarred, gaze like a blade. He doesn't remember his mother. He remembers the order. When the city falls, Sultan Mahmud II presents him with a golden chain. Not for bravery, for silence, for not flinching when cannonballs exploded nearby. In the evening, a feast in the ruins of the Byzantine palace. They are given lands, money, the right to wear a red fez, a white turban. They are no longer slaves. They are the elite. And their silence is now worth more than anyone's words. Imagine, you are the Sultan. Outside your door are 5,000 silent men with muskets. They decide who enters your presence, who becomes vizier, who dies tomorrow. By the 17th century, the Janissaries no longer waited for orders. They approved them. Ambassador Ogier Ghiselin de Busbecq wrote, "The Janissaries are not soldiers, but masters of the empire." And he was right. They controlled the bazaars, taxes. The garrison was a step away from the throne. Their support was not a favor. It was a condition for survival. Would you risk ruling without their approval? But by 1650, everything breaks down. The corps swells to 50,000. Most are not warriors. They trade in the market, marry, pass on their status to their sons. Devshirme is almost dead. Instead of boys from Balkan villages, hereditary shopkeepers with Janissary seals. The elite transforms into a corporation, and a corporation thinks not about the empire, but about profit, about privileges, about ensuring no one touches their cauldron. Do you know that feeling when the very system that created you starts to hold you back? The Janissaries no longer wanted to fight. They wanted stability. And when Sultan Osman II in 1622 decided to raise a new army, European, with cannons and discipline, they understood their time was over. And then they did what all corporations do when threatened. They removed the manager, not by vote, not by resignation, but by a scarf noose in a prison cell. Look here. This isn't decline. This is evolution. From sword to throne, from loyalty to power, from brotherhood to business. The Janissaries did not betray an ideal. They monetized it. And when the Sultan broke the covenant, unwritten but sacred, they overturned the cauldron, not as soldiers, as a board of directors. Would you survive in such a system, or would you become its victim? Because the next overturned cauldron is no longer a signal, it's a verdict, and it's already on its way. In 1621, 19-year-old Osman II stands on the balcony of Topkapi. The wind carries the smell of rotting provisions and ash. Behind him, the disgrace of Khotan, 20,000 dead, and in Constantinople, 35,000 Janissaries, of whom 10,000 remember how to hold a musket. The rest trade dried peppers and wear the uniform like a shopkeeper's attire. Osman knows if he doesn't break this rot, it will consume the empire. He whispers to the council, "I will create a new army, of Turks, of true Muslims." He thinks this is a solution. In reality, it is a verdict, his own. Imagine, you were raised as the elite, given everything, a name, a faith, brothers, status. And then the new boss says, "You are no longer needed, you are outdated code." Do you know that feeling? When loyalty suddenly becomes an obstacle? For the Janissaries, Devshirme was not kidnapping. It was an elevator from the bottom to the throne. A Christian boy from the Albanian wilderness had a better chance of becoming a grand vizier than a pasha's son, because he was pure, without clans, without a past, only with an oath. And suddenly the Sultan says, "I want those who were born Muslim." This is not a reform. This is an annulment of their lives, their meaning, their sacrifice. And then loyalty turns into rage, because devotion taken to the absolute does not forgive doubts about its value. In May 1622, in the Janissary barracks, the cauldron is overturned. Not neatly, not symbolically. With a crash, metal hits stone, soup spills onto the ground, and with it, the last drop of loyalty drains away. Look here. This isn't a riot. This is a ritual. The cauldron, their altar, their common cup, their covenant with the throne, overturned, meaning the covenant is broken. 3 days later, Osman II is dragged from the palace. His bare feet are held over coals. Red-hot tongs bite into his flesh. He screams, but not for mercy, for justice. He is strangled with a scarf, not as an enemy, as a traitor. He is buried without a name, without honors, so that no one can worship the one killed by his own guard. Would you forgive? If you were torn from your home, had your memory erased, were given a musket and told, "You are my sword," and then, "Your blade is dull, I'll take another." The Janissaries did not kill the Sultan out of greed. They killed him because the system he created no longer recognized their existence. And then the sword itself chose who would be master. After this, it's no longer the sultans who rule the empire. The cauldrons rule. Every new ruler knows, as long as the Janissaries eat from the common cauldron, he lives. Should they overturn it, and he will be the next body in an unmarked grave. But power built on fear always breeds revenge. And 200 years later, Mahmud II will remember this lesson. Only he will strike first. In June 1826, the sun over Istanbul shines as always, but this time it illuminates not the bazaar, not the mosque, not the palace. It illuminates cannons, 120 barrels aimed directly at the Janissary barracks in Et Maidan. Behind them, Mahmud II. He doesn't shout, doesn't threaten. He just waits, because he knows today they will overturn the cauldron again. And they do. With such a roar, as if the empire itself is collapsing. The handle breaks. The bronze cauldron falls onto the cobblestones, and at that moment, the Sultan nods. The first shots tear through the air. Not cannonballs, grape shot. Hundreds of iron balls flying into windows, into doors, into faces. Swords don't have time to leave their scabbards. The Janissaries flee, not as an elite, but as panicked merchants. Do you remember that sound? When glass breaks, wood splinters, and people scream not from rage but from fear. This is not a battle. This is an execution. Because cannons don't argue with swords. They obliterate them. Imagine, you are a Janissary. Your grandfather was a Janissary. Your father, too. You were born into this status, as a privilege. You wear the uniform, but haven't held a musket in a long time. You sell spices, not fight. And suddenly, a roar. Walls collapse. Fire bursts into the barracks where the common cauldron once boiled. You run, but there's nowhere to go. The new army, the Nizami-Sedid, is already in the alleys. They are not brothers. They are a machine, trained Prussian style, dressed French style, and loyal only to the Sultan. Mahmud did not declare war. He simply created an alternative. And when the old refused to yield, he flipped the switch. Would you survive in a world where your turn? Strength became a meme. In one day, more than 4,000 are killed. Bodies are not buried. They are dragged outside the city and burned in pits. Smoke hangs over the Bosphorus for 3 days. Names are erased from all lists, even those where debtors were registered. Homes are confiscated. Wives are exiled to Anatolia. Children to foreign villages. And the word Janissary, it is erased from the language. Now they are former soldiers, as if 500 years can be erased like writing from a blackboard, as if ash doesn't remember being human. Look here, this is not reform. This is the destruction of memory. But can you burn out of history those who were its engine and its brake? Do you know that feeling when you are not just killed, but erased, when not even a shadow remains? Mahmud won, but victory smells of ash. Because by killing the Janissaries, he also killed the very system that made the Ottomans great, the one that took a nameless boy and turned him into a vizier, the one that fed from one cauldron so that no one would betray. Now the empire is cleaner, but emptier. And in this emptiness, the next crisis is already brewing, because power that destroys its creators, sooner or later, is left alone, completely alone. And then even the cannons fall silent. The ash is not yet settled, but the question already hangs in the air. Who were they really? A boy from the Balkans, 8 years old, herding sheep, smelling of juniper. Officials in black robes arrive. They look, they evaluate, they take him. A year later, he doesn't remember his mother. 5 years later, he doesn't remember his name. 10 years later, he stands in formation with a yataghan and remains silent when others shout. He doesn't complain, he doesn't doubt. He is a Janissary. And in this lies his strength and his curse. Because the Devshirme system didn't just steal children, it created ideal servants, without a past, without a family, without alternatives. Only the throne, only the cauldron, only the brother on the right. But here's the paradox. The purer the slave, the more dangerous his loyalty. For when you have nothing but the power they gave you, you will protect it even from the one who gave it. Do you know that feeling? When you've invested everything, your soul, years, faith, and then they tell you, you are no longer needed. Osman II did not wish the Janissaries ill. He simply decided that the empire needed new swords. But for a Janissary, his sword is not steel. It is his identity, his right to exist. And when the Sultan turned away, they didn't beg. They overturned the cauldron, not out of greed, out of despair, because being nothing is worse than death. Imagine you were torn from your home, had your memory erased, were given a weapon and told, "You are my shield." You believed, you fought, you remained silent when others rebelled. And then they tell you, "Your shield is rusty, we'll take another." Would you forgive? Or would you also overturn the cauldron? The most dangerous slaves are not those who dream of freedom. The most dangerous are those who were given the key to the prison and told, "You are now the warden." The Janissaries didn't want to escape. They wanted to rule. And in this lies the main mistake of any despotism. To hold power, you must share it. But give a weapon a voice, and it will start choosing whom to shoot. A European ambassador wrote in 1623, "They do not serve the Sultan, they are the Sultan." And this was true. Until Mahmud II remembered, cannons don't argue, they just shoot. But even ash remembers. Even names erased from the defters whisper in the archives. Because the history of the Janissaries is not about an army. It's about a system that decided it could erase a person and in their place cultivate an idea. And the idea grew. Just not the one they expected. It became too smart, too proud, too alive. And you? Would you give up your child if you knew he would be turned into a weapon, but given a chance to become a vizier? Or would you hide him in the mountains, where Ottoman officials did not tread? Victims or traitors? Saved or broken? There is no right answer. There is only choice. And consequences. Write in the comments, who do you see the Janissary as? A boy whose childhood was stolen, or a warrior who chose his own destiny? Because as long as someone remembers the taste of lentil soup from the common cauldron, they are still with us.